So picture the pitch black of a southeast Texas night. Just totally dark. And the air isn't just hot, it's thick.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that very specific kind of thick.
Right. Humid. It's suffocating in that way that, only a Gulf Coast summer night can be, where the atmosphere literally feels like a wet wool blanket just pressing down on your chest.
Absolutely brutal.
And there are no streetlights out here. It's just the endless, dark stretch of a two-lane paved highway. And creeping along the gravel shoulder of this highway, doing maybe, 5 miles an hour, is a man on a riding lawnmower.
A riding lawnmower.
A 10-horsepower rotary engine, just vibrating violently, loud enough to wake the dead, kicking up all this dust and grass clippings into the humid air.
Which, by the way, is barely faster than a walking pace.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just have to imagine the sheer physical discomfort of that. Sitting on a hard metal seat, the engine heat radiating right up into your legs, just staring out into the absolute darkness of the Texas piney woods.
And he is doing this not out of some, eccentric whimsy, right? He's doing this because he is completely, absolutely desperate for a drink.
Yeah, he's trapped.
He is man-trapped in the terrifying grip of a looming bender. And his wife, knowing exactly what is coming, has systematically gone through the house and hidden all the keys to all of their cars.
Trying to save his life, basically.
Right, she's trying to keep him contained, but in her haste, she overlooked the keys to the lawnmower out in the shed.
Always a fatal flaw.
Yep. So this man, driven by a compulsion so deep and so visceral that it just defies all logic, hops onto this piece of landscaping equipment in the dark. And it's an 8-mile journey to the nearest open liquor store in Beaumont. 8 miles.
Yeah.
At 5 miles an hour.
I mean, if you do the math on that, it's an hour and a half.
An hour and a half.
An hour and a half sitting on a vibrating mower deck in the dead of night, exposed to the elements, exposed to passing semi-trucks, just to get his hands on a bottle.
It's just, when you hear that story in passing, it sounds like a punchline.
Like a movie scene?
Right? Like a scene from a Coen Brothers dark comedy. But that isn't just an urban legend. It isn't a myth about a lovable local character. That is the harrowing, pathetic, deeply ugly reality of severe, life-threatening addiction.
It really is.
It's the portrait of a man who is lost entirely to his own demons.
And yet the reason we are talking about this man on the lawnmower isn't because of his failures, it's because of the paradox of his existence.
Exactly.
Because this same man, reeking of sweat and desperation on the side of a Texas highway, is also the owner of what is widely considered the most transcendent, majestic, and emotionally devastating voice in the history of American music.
Which is why we're doing this deep dive today. We're taking a massive stack of sources, biographies, historical archives, critical essays, first-hand accounts, to completely deconstruct the life of George Glenn Jones.
The possum.
The possum himself. Our mission here is to understand the man behind the myth. We want to figure out how the man they called No-Show Jones, a guy whose personal life was an absolute, unmitigated disaster for decades, somehow managed to be the greatest interpreter of heartbreak the world has ever heard.
It's a massive contradiction.
It really is. So where does a compulsion that destructive and a voice that painful actually come from?
Well, to even begin to answer that, you have to look at the geography of his beginnings. You cannot separate George Jones from the environment that forged him.
So we're going back to Texas.
Right. We have to go to the Big Thicket region of southeast Texas. Specifically, this tiny, unforgiving place called Saratoga, where George was born in September of 1931.
The Big Thicket.
Yeah, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's dense, it's swampy, it's isolating. It's a landscape that historically served as a hideout for outlaws and a home for people who had nowhere else to go.
Wow. So really rough country.
Very rough. It's an environment that breeds a very specific kind of toughness just out of the sheer necessity to survive.
And that survival instinct had to kick in on day one for him. Literally, when he's born, and one of the attending doctors drops him.
Drops him.
Yes. Day one on Earth, and George Jones has a broken arm.
Jeez.
You read that in the biography, and it almost feels too perfectly metaphorical to be true. Pain from the very first breath.
It really sets a grim tone. But, the physical pain of a broken arm is fleeting. The real crucible was the psychological environment of his childhood.
Right, his family dynamic.
Exactly. He was raised with a brother and 5 sisters, eventually settling in Colmsneil, Texas. Now, his mother, Clara, she was the anchor of the family.
She's very religious, right?
Deeply devout. She played the piano in the Pentecostal church on Sundays. For George, she represented the sacred, the safe, the spiritual side of life.
But then there was the father, George Washington Jones. And this is where the story turns incredibly dark.
Yeah, it does. George Washington Jones worked in a shipyard, and by all accounts, he was a man who broke his back to provide. He was a hard worker, but he was also a severe alcoholic. And it's important to distinguish the type of alcoholic he was. He wasn't a quiet, sleepy drunk who would pass out in his chair.
No, he was mean.
He was an abusive, terrifying, violent drunk. George later recalled that the early death of his sister, Ethel, shattered something in his father. It sent his father's drinking completely out of control, resulting in severe physical and emotional abuse toward the entire family.
The house just became a minefield.
Exactly.
There is a specific recurring incident for George's childhood that I found in these sources, and it stops you in your tracks. It is the absolute definition of formative trauma.
Whoa, the singing.
Yes. So if you're listening, picture being a little kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old.
Sure.
You are fast asleep in your bed. It's the middle of the night. Suddenly, you are violently shaken awake. You open your eyes, and it's your father.
And he's blind drunk.
Blind drunk. And he hasn't come home alone. He's brought a bunch of his drunken cronies from the shipyard or the bar home with him. And he demands that little George get out of bed and sing for them.
And this wasn't like a proud father showing off a prodigy to his friends.
Not at all.
It was a hostage situation. If George refused to sing, or if he was too tired, or if he didn't sing well enough to satisfy his father's drunken standards, he would be beaten.
Whipped with a belt.
The father would take off his belt and whip him right there in front of the laughing men. He was essentially a performing monkey for a violent, unpredictable man.
But wait, hold on. This is what I don't understand and what I want to ask you about. If you are a child and you are beaten and forced to sing in the middle of the night by a terrifying authority figure, shouldn't you grow up to absolutely hate singing?
You would think so, right?
Yeah, it should be the source of your deepest, most profound trauma. Why didn't he associate the act of opening his mouth to sing with the terror of his father's belt?
It's a brilliant question, and it really gets to the absolute core of who George Jones became. If you look at what the country music historian Robert K. Orman wrote about this exact dynamic, he points out that logic absolutely dictates George should have despised music.
Right.
But the human mind, under extreme stress, especially a child's mind, does very strange adaptive things. Instead of making him hate singing, the abuse did the exact opposite. It hardwired his psychological survival directly to his vocal cords.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't about art at all. It was about staying alive.
Precisely. In that moment, a child realizes, okay, the only way I can appease this monster, the only way I can buy my safety, is to sing perfectly.
He had to be flawless.
He didn't just become a singer. He became someone who had to sing. His physical safety, his worth in the eyes of a terrifying father, and eventually his entire identity became completely dependent on the sound coming out of his mouth.
That's incredibly heavy.
He learned to pour every ounce of his fear and his desperation into the vocal performance because his life literally depended on the audience's reaction.
Think about what that does to a person's brain over time. Imagine if, right now, the only way you could stop a feeling of absolute terror was to sing a song perfectly on pitch. It fundamentally rewires your nervous system.
It does.
Music isn't a joy anymore. It's a trauma reflex. And you see that complicated relationship play out later. Even in his adult life, George admitted he deeply resented his father until the day the man died. Yet in the very same breath, he would defend him.
Yeah, the rationalization.
Right. He'd say things like, well, he was the hardest working man I ever knew. Or he'd blame the alcohol, saying, the Jones family makeup just doesn't sit well with liquor. It's that classic, heartbreaking rationalization of an abused child trying to protect the image of their abuser.
It's a tragic psychological loop. But in the midst of all this darkness, the sources point to one tiny, transformative glimmer of hope.
The radio.
Exactly. When George is 7 years old, the family acquires a radio.
And that radio isn't just a piece of furniture in the living room. For a kid trapped in the violent isolation of the Big Thicket, that radio is a portal to another universe.
It brought the outside world into that claustrophobic house. Yep. Specifically, it brought the Grand Ole Opry broadcast live from Nashville.
He would lie in bed with his parents on Saturday nights, and he was so terrified of missing the broadcast that he would beg his mother to wake him up if he drifted off to sleep.
He had to hear it.
He had to hear Roy Acuff. He had to hear Bill Monroe. And think about the contrast here, right? On Friday night, he might be woken up to be beaten by his father. On Saturday night, he's waking up to hear men singing sad songs, pouring their hearts out, and instead of being hit, they are being applauded by thousands of people.
That's a profound realization for a kid.
That radio was proof that there was a world out there where his survival mechanism was actually valued as art.
And that realization that his voice could be his ticket out, it pushes him out the door incredibly early. By the time he is 16 years old, the tension at home is unbearable, and he leaves.
Where does he go?
He heads to Jasper, Texas. He gets a gig singing and playing guitar on a local radio station, KTXJ. He's a teenager, essentially fending for himself.
Just a kid.
Right. He's literally busking on the streets of Beaumont for spare change, singing the songs he learned from the radio. He is surviving solely on the talent forged in those terrifying midnight sessions.
And he is hustling.
Yeah.
He eventually moves over to the KRIC radio station in Beaumont to play live on an afternoon show. This is the moment where destiny kind of walks through the door.
Oh, this is such a great story.
Because who happens to walk into the KRIC studio while George is working? The man who defined country music in the mid-20th century, his absolute idol, Hank Williams.
To say Hank Williams was an idol to George Jones is almost an understatement. Hank was a deity.
The god.
George later said in a documentary that during those years, he couldn't think, he couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep unless it was about Hank Williams. He was obsessively studying Hank's phrasing, his writing, his stage presence. He believed Hank was the absolute greatest who ever lived.
So put yourself in George's shoes. You're a teenager, you're playing guitar in a tiny radio booth, and the god of your entire universe casually strolls in. If it were a movie, this would be the moment where the kid plays a blazing guitar solo to impress the master, right? Hank would nod in approval and hand in a record deal. But what actually happens?
He freezes.
He completely freezes. George doesn't ask for an autograph. He doesn't try to sing for him to show off. George wrote later that he couldn't even speak. His vocal cords, the things he relied on for survival, completely shut down.
He literally just stared at him.
Just stared. He was completely paralyzed by the magnitude of the moment.
It's such a humanizing detail, isn't it? It strips away the myth of the confident rising star and shows you a starstruck, terrified kid.
Yeah, a vulnerable kid.
And George's path from that room to actual stardom was not going to be a straight, glamorous line. After a brief, somewhat surprising stint serving in the United States Marines stationed in California, he comes back to Texas and gets his first real recording break in 1954.
Okay, so the music career really starts.
Yes. He records a self-penned song called No Money in This Deal for a newly formed independent label called Starday Records.
And the environment of Starday Records is just incredible. We have to paint this picture because when people hear recording contract, they think of Abbey Road or Capitol Records in Hollywood.
I think the studios.
Right, acoustic paneling and grand pianos. Starday Records was none of that. He is working with a producer and mentor named H.W. Pappy Daly. And the recording conditions are delightfully, painfully absurd.
They are as grassroots as it gets. Starday didn't have a studio, so they recorded in the living room of Jack Starnes, who is the co-founder of the label.
Old living room.
And this house is located right on a major busy highway near Beaumont.
So they are trying to cut these emotional, raw country tracks in a living room in the sweltering Texas heat. And to try and soundproof the room, they have literally just nailed empty cardboard egg crates to the walls.
Egg crates.
That's their acoustic treatment. Egg crates. And of course, it doesn't work. It's completely porous.
Not even a little bit.
Every time a massive, heavy-duty semi-truck would rumble down the highway shifting gears, the low-end rumble would bleed right through the egg crates onto the microphones and completely ruin the vocal take.
Just rumbling through the whole house.
They had to constantly stop playing, wait for the traffic to pass, and start over. It was the grittiest, most unglamorous, frustrating way to start a career.
And he's not making a living from these records yet either. During this same period, he's working as a local DJ in Beaumont to pay the bills. And that's actually where he picks up the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life.
The Possum.
The Possum.
Which, let's be honest, is not exactly an aggressively cool nickname like the Man in Black.
No, it's not.
He got it because of his close-set eyes and his somewhat pointed, upturned nose. The local musicians started calling him Possum, and he just leaned into it. But even as the Possum is getting his feet wet and learning the ropes, the entire ground shifts underneath country music.
A massive shift.
And this forces George into a massive crisis of identity.
Because just as George is trying to establish himself as a hardcore traditional country singer in the vein of Hank Williams, 1956 happens. And what happens in 1956?
Elvis.
Elvis Presley explodes onto the national consciousness. Rock and roll arrives like a meteor. Suddenly, fiddles and steel guitars are seen as outdated hillbilly relics. Teenagers only care about rockabilly.
Right.
And the executives at Starday Records, looking at their bottom line, turn to George Jones and say, hey, we need you to stop singing sad country songs. We need you to be Elvis. We need you to sing rockabilly.
I can't imagine a worse instruction for a guy like George. It's like taking a world-class classical violinist, someone who's trained their entire life to feel the profound depths of a Bach concerto and a club owner, forcing them to put down the violin and play a plastic kazoo for tips because that's what the drunk tourists want to hear.
That's exactly what it felt like to him.
It offended his soul.
Yeah.
George was a traditionalist. He believed in the high, lonesome sound. But he was also a desperate man. He had a wife, he had kids, he was dirt poor. So he reluctantly bows to the pressure.
But he is so deeply ashamed of compromising his artistic integrity that he refuses to let them put his real name on the record.
He won't do it.
He agrees to record these upbeat rockabilly tracks, but he demands they use a pseudonym. So they release the records under the ridiculous name Thumper Jones.
Thumper Jones. He cuts a track called Rocket. And if you listen to it today, it's a fascinating, weird piece of history. You can hear this incredible country voice trying to fake rock and roll swagger. But George absolutely loathed it.
He felt it was a complete betrayal of Hank Williams. He was terrified of being shamed by his country music peers.
He hated those Thumper Jones records so viscerally that years later, when he had made some money, he admitted to using the physical vinyl records as frisbees in his backyard.
Throwing them around the yard.
He even tried to hunt down and buy up the original master tapes from the studio just so he could physically destroy them and hide that era of his life forever. He wanted to scrub the compromise from the historical record.
But of course, in the music business, the market dictates the trajectory. And ironically, his first massive, undeniable breakthrough actually skirted the very edge of that rock and roll sound he hated.
Oh, White Lightning.
Yes. In 1959, he records a song written by J.P. Richardson, better known as the Big Bopper. The song is White Lightning.
And White Lightning hits #1. It's a huge crossover-leaning smash. He is officially on the map. He is a charting artist with a #1 record. But the reality of a charting country artist in 1959 is a far cry from the modern music industry.
Oh, completely different worlds.
There are no private jets, no luxury tour buses, no champagne in the green room. Even with a #1 hit, he is still out there relentlessly grinding it out on what they affectionately called the blood bucket circuit.
And blood bucket was not an exaggeration. These were the roughest, most violent rural honky-tonks in the American South. Places where the chicken wire in front of the stage wasn't a trope, it was a necessity. Fights broke out nightly with beer bottles and pool cues. And George is driving himself between these dangerous gigs in a beat-up 1940s Packard.
And here is the most charming grassroots detail of that era. He actually had his personal phone number painted on the side of this Packard.
Just right on the door.
So if a club owner saw the car parked outside a diner, they could literally just call the possum to book a gig. Incredible hustle. But as he transitions out of the grueling 1950s and into the 1960s, a monumental artistic shift happens.
This is the turning point.
He stops being a guy doing an incredibly good impression of Hank Williams or Lefty Frizzle. He sheds the mimicry, and he truly, finally becomes George Jones. He finds the voice.
And what a voice it was. To really understand why George Jones is revered the way he is, we have to stop looking at his biography for a moment and look at the sheer physical anatomy of how he sang.
Okay, let's get into this.
The writer David Hajdu penned a brilliant essay analyzing this exact phenomenon. He pointed out that George didn't sing like an opera star or a pop crooner. A trained singer is taught to pull air deep from the diaphragm, keep a loose, relaxed jaw, and open the throat to create a warm, resonant chamber.
Right, proper technique.
George's method was physically completely contradictory to formal vocal training.
Yeah, he sang entirely from the back of his throat. He would literally tighten his larynx, squeezing the sound out under immense pressure. He would clench his jaw completely tight, almost like he was grinding his teeth.
Yes, grinding his teeth.
And then he would force the wind up from his lungs and push it through his clenched teeth.
If anyone listening tries to do that right now, if you clench your jaw shut, tighten your throat muscles, and try to sing a clear note, it usually sounds choked, nasal, and absolutely awful.
It sounds like you're being strangled.
But when George Jones did it, the sheer force of his breath control, combined with the unique physiology of his vocal cords, produced this bizarre, glittering, weirdly beautiful tone. Aju described it as a voice of exceptional range and lucent tone that could glide up to a high, weeping tenor and plunge down to a deep, resonant bass effortlessly, all while his jaw was practically wired shut.
It's fascinating because it mirrors his childhood trauma. The tight jaw, the clenched throat that is the physical posture of a man bracing for a punch.
Wow, yes.
He literally sang through a defensive physical posture. And it wasn't just the tone, it was the phrasing. He adopted this trick from his other great hero, Lefty Frizzle, but George took it to a completely different level. George realized that you don't just have to sing the word as it's written on the page.
You can break it apart.
Right, he would take a simple, single-syllable word, like love or gone, and stretch it, bend it, break it apart into microscopic emotional fragments. As he said, he learned how to make 5 syllables out of one word.
And why does that matter emotionally? Because when you stretch a word out, when your voice wavers and breaks over multiple syllables, it mimics the exact auditory sound of a human sob.
Like actual crying.
Exactly. It sounds like a voice breaking under the crushing weight of grief. That phrasing is what made him impossible to imitate perfectly. You can hit the notes George Jones hit, but you cannot replicate the microscopic hesitations and stutters that made it sound like he was actively crying while he sang.
Critics often frame George Jones as the musical equivalent of a method actor. When he sang a song about a man whose heart was breaking, he wasn't just reciting lyrics off a page. He would psychologically summon the exact memory, the exact feeling, the devastation of the character in the song.
He became the song.
He was creating an illusion of the real that was so potent it felt incredibly invasive. It felt like you were eavesdropping on a private moment of absolute despair.
And his peers recognized this instantly. The reverence that other country legends had for George is almost unparalleled in the genre. They didn't just respect him, they were in awe of him. Take Merle Haggard, for example.
A legend.
Haggard is a Mount Rushmore-level legend in his own right. But he tells this incredible story from 1961. Haggard is playing a gig at the Blackboard Cafe in Bakersfield, California. He's relatively unknown at the time, up on stage singing a Marty Robbins song. Suddenly, the double doors of the club get violently kicked open.
And who is standing there? It's George Jones. And he is predictably, spectacularly drunk.
Staggering drunk.
But here's the crazy part. Even completely intoxicated, his musical ear is flawless. He kicks the doors open, pauses, listens to Haggard sing for about 10 seconds, and shouts over the noisy crowd, "Who the F is that?"
Just yells it out.
He pushes his way to the stage and proceeds to tell Haggard that he is his new favorite country singer. Haggard said later it was one of the greatest compliments of his entire life, coming from the master himself.
And that obsession with the pure craft of singing didn't fade as George got more famous. 6 years after that, in 1967, Haggard releases a song called I Threw Away the Rose. George is out on tour somewhere in the middle of the country. He hears this ballad on the radio, and he is so deeply moved, so utterly fascinated by a specific, resonant low note that Haggard hits in the chorus that his brain just fixates on it.
He fixates to the point of madness. He completely abandons his own tour. He jumps ship. He literally rents a Learjet, which in 1967 for a country artist was an absolutely insane, exorbitant expense.
Unheard of.
He charters his private jet, flies all the way to Amarillo, Texas, tracks down where Merle Haggard is staying, just so you can walk up to him, look him in the eye, and tell him that that specific low note changed his life.
It perfectly highlights the incredible dichotomy of George Jones. Here's a man who, by all accounts, is becoming a total disaster in his daily life.
Yep.
He is unreliable, he's chaotic, he is heavily self-medicating, and he's bleeding money. But when it comes to the architecture of a country song, when it comes to the placement of a single vocal note, he is a laser-focused savant. He possesses the ear of an absolute musical genius, trapped in the body of a man who can't keep his life together.
But you cannot live that close to the raw nerve of heartbreak. You cannot summon that much darkness every night on stage without it eventually destroying you. And as we move into the late 1960s, the years of grinding on the road, the relentless binge drinking to numb the pain, and the steady diet of amphetamines just to keep his exhausted body awake to make the next gig, it all violently catches up to him.
This is the era where the stories of his drinking transition from funny, rebellious anecdotes into deeply tragic cries for help.
Like the lawnmower story we opened with, we actually have to revisit that for a second, because when you dig into the historical record, it's a little murky on exactly when that infamous ride happened.
It's heavily debated.
Right. In her autobiography, the legendary Tammy Wynette claimed that this incident happened while George was married to her. She tells a vivid story of waking up at 1 a.m., finding him missing, driving 10 miles to the nearest bar, and finding the rider mower parked outside like a horse at a saloon.
But George denied that.
He did. George, in his own accounts, always insisted it happened years earlier, during his marriage to his second wife, Shirley Corley.
It's a famous point of contention among country music historians. Who gets ownership of the lawnmower story?
But honestly, I think debating the timeline misses the much darker point. When a man is drinking so heavily and so constantly that he's commandeering 10-horsepower landscaping equipment to get to a liquor store in the middle of the night, he probably isn't taking meticulous mental notes on which wife he is currently married to.
That's a very fair point.
The terrifying truth of addiction is that it's entirely possible he did it more than once. But Wynette's claim to the story serves as a perfect transition into what is undoubtedly the most famously chaotic, mythologized relationship in country music history.
In 1969, George Jones marries superstar Tammy Wynette. Together, they are immediately crowned Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. They are the ultimate power couple.
The king and queen.
They tour together on a massive custom bus. They record duet albums together. They have a child together. To the outside world, it is a country music fairy tale.
But behind the curtain, they are deeply, fundamentally toxic together. Friends and bandmates compared them to two wounded animals trapped in a cage.
It was bad.
But musically, the marriage was an absolute goldmine. Because George, buying out his old contract to join Tammy at Epic Records, meant he was now working with her producer, the legendary Billy Sherrill.
Now, this was a pairing that country purists initially thought was a terrible idea. Billy Sherrill was not a gritty honky-tonk guy. He was the architect of what became known as the countrypolitan sound.
Countrypolitan, so smooth, pop-infused, sophisticated, sweeping melodies.
Exactly. Sherrill loved lush, sweeping, symphonic string arrangements. He used background choirs. He aimed for a polished cinematic sound. George Jones, on the other hand, was the undisputed king of the raw, traditional, beer-soaked, weeping steel guitar sound. On paper, it's oil and water.
But explain to me why it worked. Because it didn't just work, it created some of the greatest records ever made. Why does putting a raw honky-tonk singer over a symphony orchestra sound so good?
Because of the principle of contrast. Sherrill understood that if you put a raw voice over a raw band, it just sounds rough. But if you create these epically lachrymose, weeping string arrangements, a soft velvet cushion of sound, and you place George's jagged, tortured, unpredictable voice right in the center of that velvet, the contrast makes the voice sound even sharper.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's like framing a raw, bleeding nerve in pure 24-karat gold. The sophistication of the music elevated the sheer tragedy of his vocal delivery. It resulted in masterpieces like The Grand Tour, a song about a man walking through a house his wife has just abandoned.
The records were flawless, but the actual process of getting those masterpieces onto magnetic tape was utter chaos. Sherrill quickly realized that his normal production methods were useless. Recording George and Tammy singing together in the same room at the same microphone was physically impossible.
And that wasn't because they were fighting in the studio. It was because of how George's brain worked musically. Tammy Wynette was a professional who liked to know exactly how a song was going to go. She learned the melody, and she sang the melody, but Sherrill noted that George drove Tammy completely crazy because George never, ever sang a phrase the same way twice.
He was a jazz musician trapped in a country singer's body. He was constantly experimenting. On take 1, he would stretch a word out. On take 2, he would swallow the word entirely. On take 3, he would hit a falsetto note.
Right, just improvising constantly.
Tammy couldn't harmonize with him because she never knew what he was going to do next.
So Sherrill had to invent a workaround. He would have George go into the vocal booth completely alone and record his vocal first, letting him be as unpredictable as he wanted. Then Sherrill would play that tape back into Tammy's headphones, and she would essentially have to overdub her vocals, chasing George's phrasing, anticipating his stutters and bends, just to match him.
That is wild. The resulting music was magical, but the personal lives of Mr. and Mrs. Country Music were spiraling into a dark, dark abyss. The 1970s are when George hits what you would reasonably assume is rock bottom, only to find a trapdoor leading to an even deeper circle of hell.
It just gets worse and worse.
By October 1970, just after his daughter Georgette is born, he goes on such a severe, catastrophic bender that he is actually straitjacketed and committed to a padded cell at a neurological clinic in Florida. He is locked in a room for 10 days, just to safely detoxify him so he doesn't die from the withdrawals.
And the decade just wears on from there, grinding him down. The marriage cannot sustain the chaos. He and Tammy officially divorced in 1976, and the fallout is financially and emotionally ruinous.
Completely.
By 1978, the man who was just a few years earlier the king of country music is utterly destitute. He owes Tammy massive amounts of back child support. He claims to be over $1 million in debt to the IRS and various creditors. He files for bankruptcy, and for a terrifying period, he is literally homeless.
Homeless.
He is living out of the back of his car in Nashville, eating junk food and avoiding the authorities.
This is the era that truly cements the nickname No-Show Jones. Because he wasn't just a tortured artist suffering in private anymore. His unreliability had become active, professional sabotage. He missed so many concerts that promoters were constantly suing him. Fans would buy tickets, show up to the venue, and George just wouldn't be there. There's this incredible story told by Rick Blackburn, who was a vice president at CBS Records at the time.
The infamous Bottom Line Club incident in New York City.
Yes. So CBS Records realizes they need to rehabilitate George's image. They pull out all the stops. They book him at the Bottom Line, which is a highly prestigious club in New York. They hype this show for weeks. It's a massive industry showcase.
A huge deal.
The top music press from the New York Times and Rolling Stone are coming. Cast members from Saturday Night Live are on the guest list. It is a critical, highly coordinated moment to reestablish George in the mainstream cultural hub of New York. So day before he's supposed to leave, Blackburn meets with George in his office in Nashville. They finalize the travel plans. They go over the set list. George seems fine. And then George says, "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom," walks out of the office, and completely vanishes.
He didn't just miss the flight to New York. He wasn't seen or heard from by anyone at the label for 3 straight weeks.
Unbelievable.
He just did not show up.
And the reason he was vanishing for weeks at a time was because the chronic alcoholism had now been compounded by something much, much worse. A manager, allegedly trying to find a way to keep George energized enough to actually play the shows he was booked for, had introduced him to cocaine.
Which was a terrible idea.
Awful. And for a man with George's underlying trauma, cocaine didn't just give him energy. It poured high-octane gasoline on the fire of his deep-seated paranoia.
His physical deterioration became alarming to anyone who saw him. This is a grown man, standing 5'7", who weighed under 100 pounds at the height of this addiction.
Less than 100 pounds.
His skin was gray, and the psychosis caused by the sleep deprivation and the cocaine was profound. He began actively hallucinating.
He would lock himself in a room alone, completely incoherent, and he would begin to speak out loud in these distinct, arguing voices. He had 2 main alter egos that he hallucinated vividly. He called one the Duck, and the other he called the Old Man.
It's incredibly disturbing. The people around him said he would do the voice of the duck, which sounded like Donald Duck, and then he would switch to the gruff voice of the old man, and they would argue with each other about how terrible George was. He was externalizing his own self-hatred through these hallucinations.
He was so deeply entrenched in this paranoid psychosis that the physical danger became very real. During one drunken, cocaine-fueled binge convinced people were out to get him, he actually picked up a loaded gun and fired it at his good friend and occasional songwriting partner, Peanut Montgomery.
He missed hitting his friend by mere inches. It was a miracle no one was killed during this era.
So this raises a massive, glaring question. I want you to explain this to me. How does the music industry, an industry built entirely on profitability, schedules, and reliability, tolerate someone this destructive, this dangerous, and this legally risky for so long?
Right.
Any other artist who misses a showcase in New York, shoots at their friends, and winds up in padded cells would have been dropped by their label, blacklisted, and forgotten. Why did they keep humoring him?
It's the ultimate question, and the answer lies in the undeniable reality of what happened when he did manage to show up. The industry tolerated the chaos, the lawsuits, and the madness because the raw talent was literally irreplaceable. There was no one else who could do what he did. If you want the perfect example, look at Willie Nelson's 4th of July picnic in 1976.
Right in the absolute middle of George's worst spiral.
Exactly. This is a massive outdoor festival in Gonzales, Texas. It is sweltering hot, it's dusty, and the crowd consists of 80,000 young, rowdy, counterculture country rock fans. The outlaw country movement is in full swing.
Not his usual crowd.
No, not at all. George Jones, in his rhinestone suit, is booked to play, and he is terrified. He feels completely out of his element. He's looking at this sea of long hair and marijuana smoke, and he thinks they're going to boo him off the stage. He almost bolts from the festival grounds, but his band eventually forces him to walk up to the microphone, and what happens?
He absolutely decimates the crowd. He stops 80,000 rowdy partygoers dead in their tracks.
Yeah.
He steals the entire festival.
One major music magazine covering the event later called him the Holy Ghost of country music. Another critic said he was the undisputed star of the picnic, outshining Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, all of them. Because when George Jones stood in front of a microphone and opened his mouth, all the madness, all the paranoia, all the brokenness channeled into a sound of pure crystalline sorrow that no one else on earth could replicate. The crowd recognized the authenticity of his pain. The industry tolerated the devil in George Jones because he sang like an absolute angel.
But even angels fall from grace. And eventually, the patience of the industry began to run thin. By 1980, the magic seemed to have finally run out. George hasn't had a #1 solo hit in 6 long years. His voice is starting to show the wear and tear of the abuse. Many critics, label executives, and industry insiders are quietly writing his obituary, both professionally and personally.
They thought he was done.
He enters yet another psychiatric hospital in Alabama, and upon his release, he immediately drives to a store and buys a six-pack. He's viewed by the town of Nashville as a total, tragic, lost cause.
And this is exactly where we arrive at what might be the greatest, most dramatic comeback story in the history of American music. It's what you could call his 3-minute salvation.
Epic Records is desperately looking for material to try and salvage his contract, and a demo song comes across Billy Sherrill's desk. It's written by 2 incredible Nashville songwriters, Bobby Braddock and Curly Putman. The premise of the song is almost uncomfortably sad, even by country standards.
Oh, it's devastating.
It's about a man who simply refuses to get over a woman who left him years ago. He keeps her old letters by his bed, he keeps her faded picture on his wall, and he swears to his friends that he will love her until the day he dies. And he does. The brilliant, devastating twist in the song is that the only reason he finally stopped loving her today is because he died, and she has come to attend his funeral.
The song, of course, is He Stopped Loving Her Today.
And when George Jones heard the demo, he absolutely hated it.
He despised it. He thought the melody was too repetitive, and more importantly, he thought the lyrics were far too morbid. He famously told Billy Sherrill that nobody with a brain was going to buy a song that depressing. He fought against recording it.
But Sherrill pushes him. Sherrill knows what he has. So George steps up to the mic in the studio. And despite his vocal hatred for the song, the method actor inside him kicks in. The survival mechanism takes over. He delivers the vocal performance of a lifetime, the way his voice trembles on the spoken word bridge, the way he summons the breath to hit the soaring final chorus over the swelling strings. But it's one specific line in the song that grounds the entire melodrama in this gritty, chilling realism.
The line where he sings, "First time I'd seen him smile in years."
The way he delivers that line, it's not a performance, it's a transmission of pure, absolute grief. When you listen to it, you completely believe that George Jones is standing over the casket of a broken man, looking down at his face.
The irony of his resistance is staggering. The song George thought was a morbid mistake goes on to stay at #1 on the country charts for 18 weeks. It sweeps the Grammy Awards, the Country Music Association Awards, the Academy of Country Music Awards. It becomes a cultural phenomenon. It is consistently voted by artists and critics to this day as the greatest country music song ever recorded.
George later wrote in his autobiography that a 4-decade career of chaos, lawsuits, and self-destruction had been entirely salvaged by a 3-minute song. It completely resurrected his reputation. It brought him back to the very top of the mountain. But here is the tragic reality of addiction. A hit record doesn't cure a cocaine habit.
No, it doesn't.
A Grammy Award doesn't silence the voices in your head. The song saved his career, but it did not save his life.
No, the song didn't save his life. Nancy Sepulveda saved his life.
We have to talk about Nancy because she is the unsung hero of this entire saga. They meet in 1981, right as he is riding the high of the comeback. She is a 34-year-old divorcee from Louisiana. And according to her own accounts, it wasn't some magical fairy tale love at first sight. She saw exactly what everyone else saw. A man who was actively drinking and drugging himself to death.
She wasn't blind to it.
But she also saw a genuinely good, deeply frightened person buried underneath the paranoia and the booze.
Her impact on him simply cannot be overstated. Nancy was exactly what George Jones had never had in his life. She was a brick wall, she didn't drink, she didn't do drugs, and she wasn't intimidated by his fame or his tantrums. She took over his completely disastrous finances, which were a labyrinth of debts and bad contracts, and brought order to them. And most importantly, she went to war for him against his enablers.
And this wasn't just politely asking people to leave. She physically kept the drug dealers away from him. And the people supplying George with cocaine in the early 80s were not nice people. They were dangerous criminals. There are credible reports that in retaliation for Nancy cutting off their access to George and his money, local drug dealers allegedly kidnapped her teenage daughter for a terrifying period.
It was horrifying.
It was high-stakes life-or-death trauma, but she refused to back down. She stood between George Jones and the grave, and she fought the devil for him.
And it took time. It wasn't an overnight cure. He still had severe relapses. In 1983, he goes on a massive drunken rampage in Alabama, gets arrested, and ends up back in a psychiatric hospital, straitjacketed again, suffering from severe malnutrition.
Right back to the bottom.
But this time, something internally had shifted. The fight was finally gone. At 52 years old, physically battered and emotionally shattered, the desire to escape his demons finally outweighed the desire to drink. The realization that he could lose Nancy snapped him into reality.
March 1984, Birmingham, Alabama. George Jones walks onto a stage, clear-eyed, and performs his first completely sober concert since the early 1970s. And around this time, he gives a quote to a reporter that just shatters your heart because it shows so much clarity. He said, "All my life, it seems like I've been running from something. If I knew what it was, maybe I could run in the right direction, but I always seem to end up going the other way."
It's a profound moment of self-awareness. He finally stopped running, and his actions backed it up. He started looking back at the wreckage of his no-show years, and he started making amends in a very real way.
He started booking free shows. He would travel back to the specific towns where he had famously vanished or been too drunk to play, and he would play for free just to pay back the local promoters he had screwed over years earlier. He even co-wrote a song called No Show Jones alongside Peanut Montgomery.
The guy he shot at.
The very guy he had shot at. And the song was poking fun at his own terrible reputation, and he would use it to open his concerts. He owned his failures publicly.
And this ushers in the era of George the Elder Statesman. Throughout the late 80s and into the 90s, he is mostly sober, his marriage to Nancy is stable, and he is continually releasing well-regarded albums. But the struggle wasn't entirely over. The addiction was a sleeping giant.
Right, because there's one final terrifying wake-up call left in the story. Fast forward to March of 1999. George is 67 years old. He is driving his SUV near his home in Tennessee, and he loses control. He crashes the SUV into a bridge. It was a horrific wreck. He suffers a lacerated liver, a punctured lung, and he nearly dies. He ends up hospitalized in intensive care for 2 weeks.
And in May of that year, the truth of the crash comes out. He pleads guilty to drunk driving charges. He had admitted in his memoir a few years prior that he occasionally still had a glass of wine or beer, claiming he wasn't a modern alcoholic, just an old-fashioned drunk.
Which is the classic textbook lie of the addict. I have it under control. But the violence of that crash obliterates that lie completely. He told Billboard magazine that waking up in that hospital bed, realizing he had almost killed himself and ruined the life he built with Nancy, finally put the fear of God in him.
It shook him to his core.
It wasn't rehab that cured him. It wasn't a 12-step program. It was pure, unadulterated fear of death. He quit drinking and smoking forever after that day. He claimed he never even had a passing craving again.
And with his personal demons finally truly at bay, George's role in the broader country music ecosystem begins to shift. In the 1990s, country radio is changing radically. It's moving far away from the fiddles and steel guitars that defined George's career, pivoting toward a much slicker arena rock, pop-influenced sound. You have the rise of Shania Twain, Garth Brooks, Faith Hill, a totally different, highly polished era. Traditionalists are being pushed off the radio.
And George, looking at this landscape, becomes the staunch, uncompromising defender of pure country. He releases his autobiography, cleverly titled I Live to Tell It All. And in it, he expresses this genuine, almost humorous bewilderment. He looks around at his peers, guys who worked tirelessly, stayed sober, took their careers seriously, and he sees them fading into obscurity.
Yeah, the irony of it.
And here he is, a guy who treated his career like a disposable napkin for 30 years, who actively tried to ruin his own life, and his legacy is flourishing. He becomes a living legend.
But he was fiercely protective of that legacy, and he was protective of the genre itself. He felt country music was losing its soul, which leads to what I believe is one of the most iconic, defiant moments in country music television history, the 1999 Country Music Association Awards.
This gives me chills every time I hear the story because it says so much about respect. George has a hit song out called Choices, and it is a stark, brutally honest, autobiographical song about living with the consequences of your own bad decisions. The CMA invites George to perform the song on their massive live broadcast, but the producers tell him he can't play the whole song. They want him to play an abridged, shortened version, just a verse and a chorus, so they can fit more young pop country acts into the runtime.
They wanted to use him as a prop, essentially, just a quick hit of nostalgia. How does George react to that?
He says absolutely not. He tells them if I can't play the whole song, I won't play it all. And he refuses to show up. No Show Jones strikes again. But this time, it's not because he's drunk in a padded cell. It's out of pure, uncompromising artistic principle. But the story doesn't end with his absence. Alan Jackson, who is at the absolute peak of his superstardom at this moment, he's the biggest artist in the world, is scheduled to perform his own hit song on the broadcast.
Right, and Alan Jackson deeply, profoundly respected George. He saw George as the epitome of the art form, just a regular, humble guy who happened to be a genius. He felt the CMA was disrespecting the master.
So Jackson takes the stage on live television, the band kicks in, and he starts playing his own hit song. The executives in the control room are happy.
Yeah.
But halfway through his performance, Jackson turns to his band, gives them a subtle signal, and stops his own song dead in its tracks. And right there, on live national television in front of millions of people, Alan Jackson launches into a full, unapologetic, unabridged performance of George Jones's Choices.
It was a massive, unprecedented protest. It was a middle finger to the corporate establishment of Nashville, and it was a deeply respectful public salute to the master.
If we look at the timeline of his life, this moment completely cements George's status. He is no longer just a singer with a great voice who survived his own bad habits. He is the philosophical anchor of the entire country music genre. He represents the soul of it, the conscience of it.
And he carried that massive mantle into his final years. Even as his physical health failed, even as his respiratory system struggled, he kept touring, he kept singing. He couldn't hit the high notes like he used to, but the audiences didn't care. They just wanted to be in the room with him.
He announced a grand farewell tour in 2012, aiming to hit 60 cities to say goodbye to the fans. But his body, after decades of abuse, just couldn't keep up with the demand. In April of 2013, after spending several days in intensive care in Nashville due to hypoxic respiratory failure, George Glenn Jones passed away at the age of 81.
The magnitude of his influence on American culture was fully, overwhelmingly on display at his funeral.
Let me paint this final picture for you. The memorial service is held at the Grand Ole Opry House, the exact same institution that he used to beg his mother to wake him up for when he was a terrified 7-year-old boy in the Big Thicket. The stage is packed. You have state governors speaking, you have former First Lady Laura Bush delivering a heartfelt eulogy, and the musical tributes. It is a staggering roster of talent. Alan Jackson, Kid Rock, Vince Gill weeping as he sings, Patti Loveless, Charlie Daniels, Garth Brooks.
It was a gathering of musical royalty to bury a king. Because, as Merle Haggard so perfectly summarized in the wake of George's death, his voice was like a Stradivarius violin. It was one of the greatest instruments ever constructed by nature. He was the absolute standard by which every other country singer measured themselves and continues to measure themselves today.
Every songwriter sitting in a room with a guitar wondered what their words would sound like coming out of that clenched jaw and tight throat. But as we close the book on this deep dive into his life, I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering question, something to chew on long after this is over.
It's the central paradox we've been exploring this entire time.
Exactly. George Jones's ability to wring every single drop of emotion out of a lyric, to make millions of people feel understood in their deepest grief. Where did it truly come from? It came from a well of profound, inescapable trauma. It came from the terrified little boy violently woken up by an abusive father and forced to sing for his safety. It came from the padded cells and the straitjackets. It came from the decades of chemical self-destruction, the homelessness, and the hallucinated arguing voices of the duck and the old man.
The undeniable beauty of his art was inextricably chemically linked to the absolute horror of his suffering.
So, is it possible to separate the two? Imagine if we had a time machine. If we could go back to 1960 and magically wave a wand, curing George Jones of all his demons, erasing the childhood trauma, stopping the drinking before it started, giving him a peaceful, happy, well-adjusted mind, If we did that, would we still have the greatest country voice of all time? Or does true transcendent beauty in art demand a toll? To get the majestic voice that comforts the brokenhearted, does a man have to be broken down until he's riding a lawnmower on the shoulder of a dark highway, just trying to escape his own mind? It's a heavy thought. But then again, if there's anyone who understood heavy thoughts, it was the possum.